Excellent. And we'll wait a couple minutes for people to log in.
It says you were in the practice session.
Oh, I started it. Really? Um, so I clicked started.
Yeah, it says you are in practice session.
I don't know how to. Oh, there was another button under my notes. Hiding. Here we go. Hello, hello. Looking forward to having this conversation today as people log in and we wait for people to join us. Why don't you put in the chat where you're logging in from? I always like to see the furthest place that we have joining us. So welcome Frank and Harry and Janet and Laurel and Tom and Yash. And now I've lost the order, so everybody else who's starting to log in. Hey, Chris, welcome. And so in the chat, why don't you let us know where you're logging in from? And while you're there, if you notice the blue button, if it says hosts and panelists, you want to click on that and change it to everyone so that everybody can see what you put in the chat. So I'm wondering where people are from. London. Chris, you might be the furthest. I'm not sure. I see some Long Islanders, some people from Indiana, Washington, D.C., Toronto. Okay, I think London's still furthest from where we are. Long Island, yay. Hey, Janet. Wisconsin. Oh, nice. All right. Well, upstate Manhattan, love it. Well, we are going to get started, and if people join us as we're in progress, then they will do that. So I have a question for you. Thinking back on this year, did you have opportunities that went unrealized, things that you started or tried to do, conversations with people that didn't happen the way you might have wanted them to happen? So in the chat, give me a yes or a no. How certain are you that you have the skills to have more powerful conversations in the coming year that will create opportunities, the opportunities that you want? Yes or no? Do you feel like you have the skills and the mindset to have conversations to create opportunities in the new year? Some, okay. Well, hopefully after today you will have more. Some. Laurel says yes, but the exact language is always helpful. Wonderful. Always learning. Yeah, we're all always learning, and that's a wonderful thing. Well, I'm Beth Granger. I'm a trainer, consultant, and speaker on the topic of unleashing the power of LinkedIn. I'm also an Exactly What to Say certified guide. Lori?
Hi, my name is Lori Savino, and I am a real estate agent in both New York and New Jersey. I'm a real estate coach and mentor and an Exactly What to Say guide.
So in case you're not sure what that means, being an Exactly What to Say certified guide, it comes from a book by a guy named Phil M. Jones called Exactly What to Say, which is all about identifying and elevating life's critical conversations. And we have been given the training and permission to use this work to share with our clients and the world. Thus, the conversation we're having today. Now, you might want to take some notes because there might be some things you want to jot down. So grab a piece of paper and a pen or open a text document on your screen and let's get started. What we're going to be talking about today, a few things. It's this confidence. You know, when I asked you that question earlier, how certain are you that you have the skills to have these important conversations? We're going to be talking about that so that you feel more confident doing that. We'll also be talking about 4 very specific phrases that you can be using. That's why you might want to have some paper or a note document opened. And I'm really excited to go over these topics with you today. Now, let me ask you, if you're anything like me, and I'm sure you are, how many times have you left a conversation thinking, oh, I should have said that, or, oh, I could have done this instead of that, or maybe waking up at 3 in the morning for whatever reason and then replaying that conversation over and over in your head? If we were in a meeting instead of webinar, I would have a show of hands, and I'm sure many of you would be raising your hand. Now, we have something called the 4 cornerstones of conversational excellence. And the one that really applies to this idea of replaying a conversation over and over in your head is that the worst time to think about what you're going to say is as you're saying it. What happens is this awkwardness of conversation will happen when you didn't do what we call the work before the work. And the 3 areas that covers would be deciding what conversation is important to think about ahead of time, the common objections that you all get, and thinking about a conversation that you might have coming up scheduled. Maybe it's later today, in fact. Now, there are 4 cornerstones. We don't have time to go through them all today, but in other things that we put on, programs that we give, we do go through all of these. And yes, of course, a little later, we will be telling you about one of those opportunities. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that wakes up one day and just runs a marathon. This idea of the work before the work, right? With a marathon, you have to decide you're going to do it. You have to train. You have to, maybe for the New York Marathon, I think you have to run in other marathons or other things first to qualify. It's the same thing for these conversations. And the key is the thinking and the work before the work. So on your paper, if you have paper or just in your head, think about 3 critical conversations that either didn't go the way you wanted them to, or that you have coming up. 1 personal, 1 team or leadership, and 1 business growth. And if you're comfortable sharing, why don't you put in the chat the business growth one? What conversation do you have coming up that's really important to you, that you want the outcome will make a difference in your business? Now, while you're thinking about that and putting in the chat, I will tell you that one time when we did this conversation, somebody said that they had to have a conversation with their team to tell them about changes in their compensation package. Now, that's an important conversation, right? That's a critical conversation. The outcome of that affects a lot of things, both for the people hearing it and for the person leading that conversation. So what about you, Lori? Any examples of a business growth conversation that you have coming up, or that your clients have told you about?
Sure. A big thing is both working with my sellers and my buyers. So when we're putting offers in, that's a really difficult conversation that we have, either when I'm presenting an offer to a seller, or I'm trying to go over what the numbers would be for a buyer and what we should offer. So those are really 2 very critical conversations that I have all the time, and I really prepared for those conversations.
Wonderful. Well, I guess nobody's comfortable enough sharing some of the conversations that they have coming up, but hopefully you took a note, because knowing which conversations are coming up, then you can do the work before the work. The next step is to think about the common objections that you get. So here's where I went, oh, wait, we have one. Laurel has a challenge with a collaborative partner who wants to expand the scope of his work. He wants to include web design, and she doesn't care for the designs, which is hard to say. Yeah, so that's definitely an important conversation. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now let's move on to, common objections. There are things that you probably all hear in conversations that you have over and over, typically a sales conversation. So one that I know people hear all the time might be that something's too expensive. What other common objections do you typically hear? Let's put it in the chat and share what common objections you hear. And Lori, while they're coming up with them, are there things that realtors hear a lot? Are there some common objections that they hear? Now, Janet says now is not a good time. Yeah, that's a good one.
We hear that a lot, especially with getting on someone's schedule. So it's time. It's a really big thing, either now, or maybe they're just saying, this is not a good time. Or sometimes it's a buyer, sometimes it will be finances, on whether they have enough to put as a down payment.
Yeah, and in the chat we have cost is a common objection in Laurel's business. Harry says, can you reduce your price is an objection that he hears. And Chris is, I don't have time. I need to speak with my partner, waiting for the market to pick up. Yeah, these are good ones. So what we've noticed actually is that if you came up with a list of, 50 objections, that they actually all fall into these 7 categories. And the interesting thing is some are very obvious, right? Finances or time. Sometimes an objection falls into more than one. It may be time, and they even think it's time, but it's really that they don't believe you, that you can help them with their challenge or their thing. So sometimes it's not always the objection that they're saying, it's uncovering the objection that they really feel. And they might even think they're saying the right objection or the right what they think, but it might be something else. So these are the most common objection categories, if you will. Now, so we know about the important conversations that we have coming up. We now have thought about common objections that we hear and hopefully can avoid hearing using some of the techniques that we're going to talk about. And in a minute, I am going to share with you 3 ingredients to have more successful conversations, the ones that we wrote down that we're going to be having. The first ingredient is curiosity. Right? Being curious long enough, asking enough questions of your prospect or of the person that you're having a conversation with to create certainty. Right? If you ask somebody one question, you don't know enough yet. In fact, how many times, since my world is LinkedIn, how many times do people do the dreaded connect and pitch, right? They don't even know you yet. They have no clue if you need what they haven't asked you any questions. They haven't had a conversation. So being curious for long enough creates certainty. And then that certainty leads to empathy. And that's, we have a saying in the Exactly What to Say world, show them that you know them. So they'll feel that the other person will feel, if you've asked them enough questions, it creates this actual conversation where people feel like the conversation is about them, not about you. And when that happens, you have relatability. And when all of these 4 things happen, that's when you've built trust. So you've asked enough questions, you've had that conversation. The person feels like you are listening to them and interested in the result. So you have trust. Then, when you've done this, and this takes time, when you've done this, this is when you need a little bit of courage. Courage to ask or to take an action or ask them to take an action. Now, we've all heard this saying, right? If you don't ask, you don't. In the chat, what happens after that? If you don't ask, you don't get. Exactly, Janet, you don't get. So we have to be confident enough to ask, but when the time is right. And if we ask too soon, it can annoy somebody. So for instance, years ago, before I started my business, I worked for a company and I was looking for a software system. And it happened to be December, so however many years ago in December, and it was down to 3 possible vendors. One of the vendors called me and he said, do you know when you're going to have a decision? Because I have to make a boat payment. Truly, this is what he said. Now, that was about him, not me. I don't care about your boat payment. Clearly, he hadn't built up enough of a trusted relationship, because I just felt like not using him, even if I thought his product was good, just because that was such a strange interaction. So he hadn't built up that trust yet, and he asked too soon. But having the courage, there's so many of us that we give, but when it comes time to ask, we're not always comfortable. So the more you've built up the trust in the relationship, the more likely it is that that ask will just become really natural. And let's all agree that selling is earning the right to make a recommendation. So I never, ever want you to give a recommendation, kind of like that connect and pitch on LinkedIn. I never want you to give a recommendation or suggest working with somebody until you can say this phrase. Because you said XYZ, I recommend. And how do you get those things for the XYZ? It's from the curiosity. It's from the questions that you ask somebody and the relationship that you have built, that then you'll be able to say, oh, because you said you have the budget, you want to get started in January, and you have the approval to proceed, I think we should do whatever. Now you may wonder, why do I have a picture of asparagus? Beth, what are we talking about here? This is about conversations. Well, apparently, when you plant asparagus, it takes something like 3 to 4 years before it develops strong enough that you can have a continual harvest. And then when you do, it will continually harvest for something like 20 years. So you have to take care of it. You have to plant it. You have to water it. It has to have the right sun and the right nutrients. This whole thing, that triangle I showed you before, it's the same thing. You've probably heard the phrase, you have to slow down to speed up. You have to take the time and not be, people can smell desperation, right? If you're trying to rush to the sales part of it, to the asking for the sale, it's not going to work. Nurture, exactly, Harry. Exactly. So I just want to encourage you to take the time to have those conversations, ask those questions. Now, in the chat, what questions should you be asking and who should you be asking them of? So do you have a certain question or something that you should be asking one of these people that you put down on your list earlier? So is there a certain question? Is there something you need to know before you can get to that because you said? Let me know in the chat. And I understand some people are not always comfortable sharing some of that stuff in the chat, but Lori, is there a certain question when it comes to real estate that you have to be sure to ask somebody, or that you have to know before you can make a recommendation?
Yeah, I want to know like what their experience is, what their experience working with an agent. I want to know if they've ever purchased a house before, because if it's a seller putting a house on the market, because and then it gives me more clarity to understand what experiences they have and helps me to understand, so then I can help them better.
I love that. And we have two in the chat. We have, what do you need right now? That's a great one. And Harry says, in a perfect world, when would you like to be in your new home? Yeah, so that's about timing, right? So one of the things that's important in developing trust and having this, expressing the curiosity, is you're going to ask questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want them to sound like a script. You want to actually listen to the response. I've seen some people have a list of questions and they're not even really listening to the next question, to the response to the question. It has to be a conversation, a back and forth. Sometimes they're going to ask you a question in between the questions that you're going to ask them. But when you do ask these questions and come from curiosity, what does that lead to? Conversations. And these conversations are what are so powerful and what build up that trust. And the conversations, what do they lead to? Relationships. And that's what we want. We want a strong relationship with the person we're going to be doing business with, or hopefully doing business with, whether it's now or in the future. What does that lead to? Opportunities, the opportunities that we all want. And of course, that leads to the action. So I'm going to repeat that. It's the questions that you ask lead to the conversations and that curiosity, right? That's where the questions come from, but not from a script and not without listening. That leads to the relationships, and that's what leads to the opportunities and the action that you are hoping for. Sometimes people say, I'm looking for more opportunities. And what I would like to suggest is what they really need to do is be asking more questions. So I've talked about these foundational ideas and the mindset and the way to think about this. Now, Lori is going to share some specific phrases to help you stay in the game and continue the conversation and avoid the objections. Lori.
That was great. So sometimes all we're trying to do is invite the other person to see things from a slightly different point of view. Well, these magic phrases are going to help you to become more curious, shifting their vantage point and putting you back in the driver's seat in the conversation. So before we get into these magic phrases, we're going to do the work behind the work. Beth, go to the next slide. This is a great chart from actually Dale Carnegie, who wrote a great little book on how to win friends and influence people. Write in the chat if you've read the book. I have many times. It's one of the pillars of being a salesperson, but also just learning. Right? Really learning how to have a relationship with someone. It's so important. So this is really a great tool that you could put into your toolbox today. So when you are, and especially when things are thrown at you, right? We all have our opinions. And how many of you actually want to answer before the person has stopped asking their question or saying their opinion, right? So if we stop, if we think, if you pause, it really helps the other person to feel heard. So if someone says something to you, you always have a thought, you have an opinion, right? So what do you think is the first thing? What do I think about that, right? Why do I think that? And the key to this is the evidence. The evidence is going to help you to shift them from certainty to doubt, because you're going to come up with the evidence. For example, when I am working with a seller and they'll say to me, especially right now we're in low inventory, and they say, well, I know my house will sell in 4 or 5 days, but I can't buy a house, right? So what do I think? Well, I already know that I get emails every single day with off-market properties. I actually also, right now the inventory for people who have tried to put their house for sale much higher than they want, that's sitting there. So we have inventory that's sitting that's overpriced for 30 and 60 days. So I know they're probably much more negotiable now than they were 30 days ago, right? So this is the formula you're going to use. I would tell him, and always repeat what the other person has said, because that also will summarize for understanding. It'll make them feel heard. So you want to say, Mr. Seller, I understand that you're thinking that maybe you won't be able to find a property, but do you know that I actually get houses every single day in my email, off-market properties that are not on the market that only we know about. Also, we have this inventory that's been sitting there for 30, 60, 90 days, and it may be slightly higher than you want to spend, but I bet you they're more negotiable. So therefore, I believe, which is your key, right? Therefore, I believe that between off-market and inventory sitting, we'll be able to find your house. So do you think that someone is going to be more apt to say, you know what, I think she's right? Am I creating that doubt? What do you think? Write that in the chat. Do you think that would work? And also on that piece of paper, try to write down the situations that this happens. And a lot of salespeople work on scripts, but what I say is really work on a question tree. Go through those common objections that Beth wrote down. What are your objections? What can you say? And this is going to help you prepare for the conversation. So you're going to have the evidence. So, yep, Harry says yes. Great. Okay, next slide. What do you understand? How many times have you been in a conversation where you quickly become into a debate, right? The other person wants to tell you that you're wrong and they're right. So what do you understand really helps you with context. Because when we're talking about the triangle, right, you need the context in order to get that certainty. You want to get really, really, really curious about the person you're talking to. I promise you, the more curious you get with your clients, the more relatability that you're going to have. And over the next 4 phrases, you're going to see this. So I might say to someone, what do you understand about refinancing? What do you understand about buying down points, right? This would be in the real estate world. You can also use this in maybe a leadership role or a company. What do you understand about how our company does things differently? Right? These are really great phrases because now you sit back and listen. You want to hear what they understand. And this way you can kind of go through your conversation, especially with sales. When you're in sales, you want to kind of create the string between the two of you. So this way you're connected and you can sort of drive the conversation anywhere you want to go. And that happens through this context, which is so important. Okay, what's our next one? What is your experience? Well, how many times have you found yourself defending who you are, what your services are, what your prices are, right? So what is your experience really helps you to understand what their experience level is. I have a great story for you. So I was sitting with a seller and we were going through paperwork and we have some disclosures. And as we were going through them, he asked me a question. He's like, what happens if you get your own buyer? And I was sort of taken back because I usually don't get that question. So I immediately asked him, well, why are you asking me that? What is your experience? So one of the first houses he went to buy, the agent did not tell him that her fiduciary responsibility was with the seller and that he was going unrepresented. So this was something that was really important to him because the experience was not good. So what would have happened if I didn't know this and halfway through, I got my own buyer, it was a direct deal. And then now he's feeling anxious. He's a little upset about it, but he's not telling me, but I know something has shifted. Right. So that would create a really much different experience. And it's really important we create a really good experience with our clients. Right. But now I had that information. So now I knew. I said, not a problem. I will not do a direct deal. I'll make sure that I designate someone in my office or they'll get an agent to represent them. And now that's really, I'm telling you, we're getting curious, stepping back, really understanding this is really going to help you to go forward. Our next one is how certainty when it goes to happen. You have to create some uncertainty, right? We want to get from them being certain to creating some doubt, right? So how certain are you that your house is going to sell at this price? It's a really big one that I have with my sellers because they want to stay high. And that I know one of the good ways of really going out there and putting house on the market is doing market value or maybe slightly under to create that want and that desire. So how certain are you is something that really creates that going again from them being certain, creating that doubt, opening the dialogue so you're able to really talk to them and get to whatever end you want. Like, so for it's me as a real estate agent, it might be something that I'm trying to get a seller to sign or I'm trying to work with a buyer in terms of going there. So how certain are you really, you want to gain their commitment to see how certain they are and that's that they really understand. And this is something that really has helped me in my career to find out because when someone's really adamant about something, this is something that you can kind of step back and say, well, how certain are you? Right? So you know that how certain are you that this offer is not going to be your best offer? So we always know, again, as real estate agents, it's really weird, but the first offer is typically 99% of the time the highest offer. So we want to create that and trying to have a seller understand that is something saying, how certain are you that this is going to be your best offer, right? And then this way we can have a conversation. It opens that conversation up to really do that. So our next magic phrase is, when was the last time? What does this do? This immediately they go into story time. And this is great because you can just sit back and they will hear, right? So sometimes you can say was like, when was the last time you paid for something more than you really wanted to do? You went kind of over your budget, right? Well, immediately they might tell you about a couch that they bought, right? They walked in with a $2,000 budget, then they saw this most gorgeous couch ever, right? And then they bought it for $3,000, right? Same thing when it comes to a house. And really getting them to understand, because sometimes when it turns around in terms of a mortgage, going up another 50,000 or 100,000 in over 30 years really isn't a lot. So that kind of helps them to understand. So we want to have a little perspective here, right? So again, then when is the last time is again, it's really getting that relatability because maybe they're telling your story. You can either laugh about it or you can go, oh, that was a really bad experience, especially with my seller, right? Who had a really bad experience working with that agent. So I wanted to make sure that I had all that information. Now I know what to do, which is really great. So that's something that's really, really important to kind of learn. So what's our next slide? Elevate your conversations. This is really important to use these magic phrases. Make sure that you're stopping in terms of your conversations. You want really good conversations. It's not about all of them. It's about, really having 10 good conversations. So make sure that you're using these phrases, practice them every day, and elevate your conversation. So I have a question for you. How important is it to you that you continue this work? How important is you that you get these magic phrases down? And there's 23 magic phrases. Do you want to know more? Well, okay, so Beth and I have a great opportunity for you coming up. We have you can go to the next slide. Beth, and so we're doing a 90-minute workshop. And what's really different about this one is it's going to be interactive. It's not going to be like this where we're going through questions. You'll be able to talk with us. There's a great workbook that comes along with it, which is wonderful, and exactly what to say workbook that's extra. But right now it's limited time. So get out your phones, get that QR code. It's $199. The workbook is extra, but it's January 10th. It's at 9 a.m. It's 90 minutes with Beth and I. We're going to go over the 4 cornerstones. We're going to go into the triangle deeply. We're going into more phrases. Beth, do you have anything to add about this great 90-minute webinar?
Well, yes. Whether or not this is for you, who do you know? Which, by the way, is another one of the phrases. Who do you know that might find value in this, that wasn't on this webinar, that really needs to know this work and make an impact on the important conversations that they're having next year? Feel free to send them that link.
Yeah, exactly. Now, after that, we also have a 2-day certification, and we're going to be having some dates that come up next year, and you definitely don't want to miss that. Because it's in our headquarters that overlooks Central Park. It's amazing. 2-day immersive. We go through every single magic phrase. So it really helps you to elevate your conversation. So I hope that you really, really enjoyed your time with us today. I know that we're so grateful for you to be here. Here is our information. If you want to reach out to us, ask any questions. We hope we see you on the 10th at our workshop. And again, thank you so much, Beth.
And thank you. And if you try these, or when you try these phrases, let us know. We're eager to hear how it changes the power of the conversations that you're having. So happy holidays, everybody, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.